Hey there, this is Gayle from BERNINA of Naperville. Thanks for joining us. Hey, today I'm going to show you how to take this fat quarter pack and make a super cute little table topper, wall hanging, or just enjoy the process of piecing, quilting, and binding something all in one go. So we've made this little pattern. Now this is a 4-patch in a 9-patch. Don't worry, I'll explain more later. But what you're going to learn to do is piece, border, quilt, and bind. So why am I standing here? Let's get started. So here's our fabrics. We've got our 2 Allison Glass Sun prints. We've got the 2 from the Modern Quilt Studio for Benartex. We've got some homespun, and we've got a tone-on-tone background fabric. So this is the first one that we're going to cut. And as you can see here, I've got a long ruler. This is a 6-inch by 24-inch, and I've got my black cutting mat. Now, I want you to know that usually, now these are fat quarters, but usually when you get a yard of fabric or a cut of fabric or whatever, you've got your bolt crease down here and the selvage edge up there. And these rulers and this mat are designed to cut strips that would be the half of the width of fabric. Width of fabric is about 44 inches, and so you would easily be able to cut strips of fabric when it's folded at 22 inches. So sometimes you might want to go to a smaller ruler if we're working with the fat quarters. Now, if you're a newbie, you might want to go ahead and use the long ruler and only cut in single widths of these fat quarters just so that you can be more accurate. So we've got our 6 by 24-inch ruler, our mat, and our Tula 6.5-inch ruler. Now, I like to use these because we're going to be cutting some squares, and this one has nice markings and it's got the grippy stuff underneath. But before you do any square cutting, the first thing is for us to cut the strips. So like I said, we're going to cut our white fabric first. So I'm going to fold this out and I'm going to cut a strip that is going to be 4.5 inches. So I'm going to cut one 4.5-inch strip, and I'm going to cut one 2.5-inch strip. So here is our fat quarter. I did take it over to the iron and steam out the little folds in it. And I'm going to be using my Tula Pink rotary cutter. I really like this one because I feel like I can kind of hold it like this and get a little bit more control over the cutting, but there's all different kinds. This is the one that I'm going to use today. So the first thing is, when you get a fat quarter, sometimes by no fault of anybody other than just the way things flop, sometimes the pieces aren't quite even on the end. And so when we are cutting to be accurate, we want to make sure that we cut so that we can be completely accurate. And so one of the ways that I like to do that is to stack my ruler. So I'm going to use that 6.5-inch ruler, and I'm going to line this up. So I'm first going to start by just making a straight edge on the bottom of my fat quarter here, because I can see that it got like a little wavy right in here. So I'm just going to make a cut there. And then I'm going to peel that away. And don't forget that every time you want to expose your blade, then the minute you make a cut, you want to fold that up so that you don't drop your rotary cutter and have it cut your foot or something like that. So now that I have this edge straight, I'm going to line up my little 6.5-inch ruler right along that straight edge, and I want to trim a piece of fabric on the edge so it's nice and straight. Just like that. So I'm just going to sacrifice about 1/2 inch of this material here. There we go, and I can peel that away. So now I have a nice straight edge. So my first cut is going to be 4.5 inches. And you might notice that my mat is turned upside down, and that's because I don't use the lines on a cutting mat as my guide. I actually use the lines on my ruler. It's far more accurate. These self-healing cutting mats tend to shrink a little bit as you use them, and And this just provides you a little bit more control over cutting the stuff straight and accurately. So now I'm going to spider finger my hand on this ruler so it doesn't slip. I've got everything lined up. If you have to double check, 1, 2, 3, 4 inches plus a half, that's what I need. So now I'm going to cut this. And now that's a 4.5 inch strip. And then I want to cut 2.5 inches. Okay, so now that I have these, I need 8 2.5 inch squares from this and 4 4.5 inch squares from this. So we're going to start with cutting our 4 4.5 inch squares. So like I said, when I cut these, I like to use a smaller ruler, and that's just so I don't have the long ruler bumping me in the belly or something like that. So I know that it's 4.5 inches wide this way, and now I can take my 4.5 inch measurements here on my ruler and line that up and make my first cut. So now I have one square, 2, 3, 4. Now it's time for our 2.5 inch piece. Now I need 8 of these, so I am going to line this up, 2.5, 2.5. Now, as you get through this and you become more confident, we could fold this to do this process. And remember, when you are piecing or sewing, it's always best to not include that selvage edge bit at the end. Now, some fabrics have fancier selvages than the others. You can keep your selvage and cut 1/4 inch away from the little holes or the white area of the selvage, but we don't want to include them into our work. So we can toss this aside. Now, you have enough fabric to make 2 blocks with this white background, but we're just going to make one, and we're going to make a little candle pad. And that's going to be fun because you're going to learn how to do quilting in this segment, and you're going to learn how to bind something and add a border. So, hey, look at that. All right, so now it's time to get our St. Patrick's green. We're not going to be pinched because we're going to have green in our quilt. All right, so this one is another one that I already pressed to get our little creases out, but remember, like I did the other, just to make sure we're starting with a nice crisp edge on this, I'm just going to trim this nice and straight. There we go. And now I'm going to do my little ruler butting ballet. And I'm going to line this up. I'm lining a straight line up on my ruler right here to the edge of my fabric. And I'm just going to shimmy it all the way down here to the edge. And I'm going to cut this much off right here. Now, let's do something fun. Remember how I was telling you that I sometimes save the selvage edge like this right here? Well, I'm going to save that, and I'm going to leave about 1/4 inch away from that white area. All right, I'm going to take this and save this for another project down the road. All right, so now let's turn this guy back around here, and we're just going to cut one 2.5 inch strip. And once again, if you were feeling more confident and you wanted to cut together, we could cut the green and the blue together, but I'm going to do them separately. Now that we have the green, we're going to cut this into 6 2.5-inch squares. All right, so then repeat that for the blue. All right, here's a little tour of our Patchwork Feet. Now today I'm going to be using this BERNINA 570. Now the 570 has dual feed and 9mm wide stitching. So there are some things that I'm going to use on this machine, but let's take a tour in case you have a different BERNINA. So of course we've got our tried and true 37 foot. You can see this is my original 37 foot, and you can see it's got some love on it there, little stickers like rubbing off and everything, but hey, it still works. So the anatomy of the patchwork foot is that it has 1/4 of an inch between here and the center needle spacing on the foot. And also, if you look at these notches, there's 1/4 of an inch before the needle, at the needle, and behind the needle, and that's good for those little pivot spots or set-in seams and things like that. Now, later on, they designed a 37 foot that works for the machines like our 570 here with the dual feed, and you can see that there. So that's just like the foot I just showed you, except it's got the notch out here to bring the dual feed down. Also, BERNINA came out with a foot. It's the 1/4 inch foot, except it's got this little helping hand on the side, and that kind of creates a wall that you would butt your material right up to get your 1/4 of an inch. This is great when you're doing long seams where, you know, if you're like me, a little ADD, and you tend to like weave off the road, this one kind of keeps you on the path for long seams. This one, although you can use it with the 9mm machines, is some people don't like it because this little dude tends to sit right on the feed dogs. So, you know, sometimes if you have a 5.5mm machine, and that would be like the BERNINA 215, the Virtuosa and Aurora lines, the 3 series, and the 435 and the 535, they have 5.5mm stitch width. So, you know, you might consider using this one. Just like the other, they make a D version of that foot as well. So there you go. And then finally, there has been a design of the feet that are perfect for the 9mm sewing. And see how one side of this is a little wider? And that's just to help get a little bit more coverage on those wider feed dogs for the 9mm machines, which would be the 480, 570, 590, 740, 770, 790, 880, and then a handful of other machines going back like the Artista 180, 185, 200, 730, things like that. But anyway, so those are the patchwork feet. Now, when I want to get my perfect patchwork seams, I also use a straight stitch needle plate. So the straight stitch needle plate is this little guy right here, and see that hole right there? That hole right in the middle is going to really stabilize our piecing, so we will penetrate that without the fabric dipping into that wider opening. For example, see that wider opening there? I mean, it'll still work, but if you're a little fuss budget, you're going to want this straight stitch needle plate. So I'm just going to put that on like so and pop it into place. I've decided to use the 97 foot that comes with the BERNINA 570 Quilters Edition. We're going to be doing all straight grain fabric, no bias or weird half square triangles. So I'm just going to use this one. So I'm going to plop this on the machine. You know, our BERNINA feet, they're one-handtastic. So there we go, straight stitch on, we're good. I like to lay my quilt block out next to my machine, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to make our little 4 patches. Now, a 4 patch is called a 4 patch because it's a square made up of 4 different blocks, so a 2 by 2 layout. So we're going to make 5 4-patches that will ultimately go into a 9-patch block that we're making here. So when I lay this out, I'm going to chain piece. That's where I'm going to sew all of these together, and they're going to be connected. So I'm going to chain piece all of my little pieces exactly the way I want to sew them together. So I'm going to take this piece and lay it over on top of the blue, just like that. Then I'm going to take this blue and lay it on top of the white. Now I know there's some of you out there that have pieced before, and you might have done these in strips. Well, we'll cover that at another time, but this is the way that we're going to make this one. And then I'm going to take the green and put that on white. And of course you're going to line your edges up together. So when you do that, you're going to line them up just like this, nice and perfect. And you know, I might adjust when I get to my machine. Okay, and now just let's go in order. So I'm just lining everything up just like this. Kind of like putting them together in sets. Okay, now I'm going to put this next to my machine and we're going to piece. All right, so I have my little pieces all stacked up nicely. So I'm placing that under my foot, and look just here, that little dot right there. So this little dot right there is the 1/4 inch mark. So I'm going to line that up, and I'm going to start this with my foot, even with my little notch on the side of my foot, and this first line right there on my needle plate, I'm going to lower the foot down right on that spot, and that's how I'm going to get started with my sewing. Don't forget, when you first start sewing, it's important to not really hold your threads, but put your little finger down on the thread so they don't get sucked down in the machine. And now when I get to the edge, I'm going to stop. I'm going to take my next set, you know, lined up perfectly together, all neat and tidy, and I'm going to bump that right under my foot. I can lift with my little knee lever because I've got the freehand system installed on this machine. And now I'll do that again, and I'm just going to keep doing this through all of my pieces. I have laid out my little chain pieces so I can press to the dark side. Now, I know that there are some discussions about, do you press seams open or do you press them to the side? I tend to press to the side because it's a little stronger, but if I have a ton of piecing on a quilt, I will also press open. So it just kind of depends on how much bulk I'm going to have and things like that. But in this application, I'm going to press to the dark side, and I'm using my Laura Star iron. And yes, I will use the steam to do this. And look, so powerful. Knocked off my little configuration here. All right, so I'm going to use the iron to gently fold over my pieces. And then I'll come back on this side and press over. Now, another reason why I like to press to one side or the other is that these two pieces are going to be sewn together, so I like to snuggle butt them together. And I'll show you snuggle butting when we get to the machine. But look, these are going to be the cutest little 4 patches. All right, so now what I want to do is separate my pairs. So I'm going to cut, 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 cut. And I like to use this little guy. This is a blade saver. So this is an old rotary cutter blade that I had that wasn't really good for cutting the fabric anymore, but it's certainly good for cutting little snips. And you know, sometimes just doing this again and again doesn't feel very good. So I'm just gonna use this to cut my pairs. All right, let's go to the machine. Well, when I was back here at the machine before, you noticed I didn't pin. I sometimes don't pin, but if you're new at this, you probably are going to want to. Here's a little cool thing. So we want to make sure that when we sew this piece to this piece, that little intersection is perfect. And one of the ways that we do it, I had mentioned snuggle butting. Snuggle butting is where I take this piece, we press to the blue on both of these pieces. And so that's where I'm going to just line this up so these two pieces complement each other nicely. And I call that snuggle butting. And then I'm going to take my fork pin and put it in so that both of these pieces are being held really nicely together. And so you can go through and pin all of your intersections like this and then do your 1/4 inch seam just like we did before. Now, when I'm sewing within a fraction of my fork pin there. So I don't want to sew through my pin, but now it's safe to take it out because everything is secure down here, and I'm just going to stitch. And now I just keep doing this until all of my little 4 patches have been sewn together. Okay, so we're just lining this up again, and now this time we don't need to be as fussy with how we press other than just pressing. So, and now we have a 4 patch. And once again, cutting them apart here. Oof, that one has a long tail. We get back to the machine, we'll turn our 4 patches into sewing them into a 9 patch. All right, so this one goes in the middle, and then I want to line up my greens to form this diagonal and the blues to form this diagonal. So just like that. So now, just like we did our other, now this time I'm going to sew my pieces together in a certain configuration, and I'm not going to cut my little chain pieces. I'm going to leave them together while the whole thing is stitched. So I'm going to sew this row together, and then I'll sew these pieces onto this row. All right, so I'm lining this up again, just like I did with my other little blocks, and I'm just going to stitch. And I'm not pinning this time, but I am keeping everything lined up here. And now my next set, once again, I'm going to line this up, and I'm going in the order of my row so that when all of this stuff is lined up together, I won't have to separate this little connecting thread. All right, so now I'm going to open up this piece and attach my blue piece, or my blue 4-patch. All right, here's our piece. See how it's stuck together? We can just keep it like this. Now, normally I would tell you to press to the dark side, but in this case, it actually works out a little bit better if we press to the background. All right, so now I'm going to go back with those forked pins, and I'm going to pin in 2 places now, here and here. And then, of course, the same on this side. I'm using 2 pins this time, and I'm going to fold this over like you saw on the ironing board, and I'm going to snuggle butt my little edges together so that they meet up perfectly. There we go. And pin. And then I'm going to do it on this side. Just like that. And pin. And then we're going to stitch. So we're just repeating the other side, and then after the seam is done, we'll have our 9 patch completed. It should measure 12.5 inches or 12 inches finished, but then we're gonna add a border to it and then sandwich it together, quilt it, and bind it. Remember how I was talking to you about different size rulers for the job? Well, we used our 6.5 inch ruler when we were working with our little pieces here, but now that we're working with a larger block, you might need to go up to a larger ruler. And this is a 15-inch ruler. We carry 14-inch rulers. There's a 14.5-inch ruler that looks just like this one that I absolutely love. This is one of my older rulers. You can see here, it's been through the ringer, folks. But nonetheless, whatever ruler you choose, it's good if it has some grip. I've got little sandpaper dots on this one. And I just want to line this up and measure to make sure that it's 12.5 inches. And indeed it is. So that means now I can cut my borders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another fat quarter from our pack for the border. I've decided to use this one, and I will have enough from one fat quarter to make the border on this block. I am going to be cutting this at about 2-inch border. So that's going to be a 2-inch finish. So that means I'm going to cut 2.5 inches. So I'm going to need 2 pieces that are 2.5 by 12.5. And then I'll need a piece that's 2.5 by 16.5. So we're just doing straight borders here. And remember how I talked to you earlier in the video about cutting double cut? Well, that's what I want to do with this. So I'm just going to start by trimming off our selvage edge and butt my rulers up together like this. All right. And now I'm going to cut 2 pieces at the same time that are 2.5 inches. Perfect. So I need to cut 2 pieces that are 12.5 inches. So 2.5 by 12.5. Perfect. This is going to be scrap. And then I need to cut 2 more strips, and these are going to be the 16.5 inch pieces. And then this is scrap. So let's go back to the machine and sew our borders on. Side borders, however you want to look at this, but nonetheless, you're going to sew sides on, then the top on. So the first step in this is I'm going to sew this piece to this piece and this piece to this piece and press to the border. Then I'm going to sew my side pieces on. You might need to do a few pins when you put your long piece on here. I sew with my border piece on top. And you know, honestly, the forked pins work nicely for this, but in the real world, I pin when I'm doing a long border seam on a lap quilt and things like that. But I pin at the beginning and the end. And then I pin kind of in between, but because we cut this perfectly, to me, that's enough pinning. But if you're new, you might want to add more pins. And I'm going to line this up here like I've been doing everything. Just get a little wiggle under there. I'm going to pull this out. Okay. Okay. And now do the same on the other side. You might need to do a few pins when you put your long piece on here. I sew with my border piece on top. And you know, honestly, the forked pins work nicely for this, but in the real world, I pin when I'm doing a long border seam on a lap quilt and things like that. But I pin at the beginning and the end. And then I pin kind of in between, but because we cut this perfectly, to me, that's enough pinning, but if you're new, you might want to add more pins. And I'm going to line this up here like I've been doing everything. Just get a little wiggle wiggle under there. I'm going to pull this out. Okay. Okay. And now do the same on the other side. Line that up to the end. Put in a little pin. Line it up at the bottom. Put in a pin. There we go, perfect. Now start it. All right, with the magic of video, I have pressed that over to my border, and now I'm gonna add my final piece here, the side borders. And once again, if you feel comfortable, pin. Pin as much as you like to get a nice, accurate piece. Okay, all right, so now we're gonna give this a whirl. And the other side. Okay, here we go. So here is our border print that we're going to use for our backing, and I want to incorporate this pretty border into the backing. So I'm going to just line this up like this and take my batting. So I cut an 18-inch square batting. This is our fat quarter uncut. And now I'm going to put my batting down, and the fluffy side of the batting versus the side where you can see the little holes in the batting. Fluffy side goes down. And I'm going to line this right up a little bit to the selvage edge like that. And then I'm going to take our block. Here's our pretty block. And I'm going to line that up. I don't want it to be on top of that white selvage edge, but I want it to be close. And I want it to be straight on here like this. And then I want to actually pin baste. And I'm going to pin baste about every 2.5 inches. I like to use these because they're ergonomic. For a small project like this, it might not make that much of a difference, but if you're gonna pin baste a giant quilt, you're gonna want something that's easy to unclip and clip. And these little guys have like a little holder that makes it a little bit easier on your fingers, your fingernails, and all of that good stuff. So, and they're pink and yellow, which are super cute. And they're also curved, so that makes it easier to go down into the material. So I'm gonna put one at the corner. All right, so it's time to do some quilting. We're gonna stick to something easy, and that's straight line quilting with our Bernina dual feed. Like I said, I'm using the Bernina 570, so I'm not gonna be using the walking foot for this project. However, some of you might want to be familiar with the walking foot. You can see it's a little bit different. The dual feed feet are opened up in the back so that you can pull this little guy down and kind of gives you a little extra feed dogs there under the presser foot. Whereas the removable walking foot allows you to have rubbery grips on either side of the needle. Now, one thing this will do is when you put this on a 9mm machine, you're only going to get that 5.5mm stitch width out of this, but some people really like this for doing the quilting. I am fine with dual feed, particularly for this project, but just so you know that this is available. I'm starting off with my straight stitch and I'm elongating it because when I do quilting, I usually go for about a 3mm long stitch length. Another thing that I'm going to be doing today is making sure that my needle is going to land in the down position. So I have selected my needle down button, so that means every time I stop sewing, the needle lands in the down position. I find that really helpful as I need to reposition things when I do quilting. As I'm getting the work under here, there's a few things that I can do. If I want super straight lines, other than like eyeballing this going diagonally, because I'm going to make an X on my quilt here. If I wanted, I could use some tape. I could draw a straight line, but I'm just going to go from corner to corner very easily. I learned this little trick from my friend Catherine Redford. And she uses tape to start a straight line. So if you're new and you're not very good at drawing straight lines and what have you, then you might want to try this technique. Another thing I want to show you is I want you to start by lowering your foot and putting your needle down, bringing your needle up, bringing your foot up, and pulling your bobbin thread up through the top. That will keep everything nice and pretty and you won't get your thread in a bunch underneath. So now I don't want to stitch on the blue tape. I just want to go right beside it. And I always like to keep my hands held parallel to the line that I'm stitching. You've probably also noticed that I have my pins I removed from this row, but that just helped me get a little bit better grip here. And see, with landing with that needle in the down position, I come to a complete stop, the quilt, before I move my hands. Oops. Okay, now I'm going to stop, remove the tape, and then add my guides. You probably, if you haven't already noticed, that sometimes these little screws in the back of the feet fall out. Don't worry, that's just a screw from your foot, not from up in your machine. But I am going to do a little bit of guided quilting. I want to go, I don't know, probably about, I'm going to measure here on my quilt, that distance away. So I lined up my guide and now I'm ready to go. I'm going to put my foot on. Again, I've got the guide on there, and I'm ready to get started over here on this side of the machine. And just like I showed you before, we want to put our foot down and bring that needle up. Bring our foot up so we can grab our bottom thread. There we go. And I'm just going to line that guide right up with my stitching. Perfect. Now, sometimes I'm lazy and I travel a little bit. You know what I mean by that? By doing this, go around the little corner. There we go. And now I'm going to go down to the other piece and come back down the other way. Just making sure that I kind of line this up a little bit. There we go. Yep, and sometimes the pins get in the way, so you have to take them out. All right, and now I'm just going to go across the other way. All right, I did my quilting in both directions, and I got this really pretty, just a pretty little design from this straight stitching. Now, of course, I can do a little bit more, so I'm going to show you how to do a little cute motif here where I'm going to actually draw the lines for you and show you how you can follow along using the Bernina stitch regulator. But I want you to know that this batting that we have in here, this is Quilter's Dream Cotton Select Loft, and it's really perfect because it's nice and flat and makes it easy to manage when you're learning to quilt, but it's also, when you wash it, it's going to give a little bit of a puff and a quilty look to the piece, but it's a confidence booster, and you know, we love carrying this product because also the batting is very evenly distributed. Like, you don't get a lot of like thin spots on it. It's really good quality. But let's get that stitch regulator foot on here and do a little bit of free motion, and then it's on to the binding. Faintly, I have drawn in my little designs here. Some people call these wishbones. I call them crazy eights, whatever, because I think it's like making like a little infinity symbol. Well, our goal is to follow these using our Bernina stitch regulator, and I'm going to do that right now. Okay, I'm at my 570, got my stitch regulator foot on. I'm using a straight stitch. Everything is the default setting, and now I'm going to get my gloves on, and we're going to follow this little design. And just like we started by bringing the needle into the material, and then up through the material with our walking foot, the same rules apply for free motion. So I'm going to pull that thread out and just kind of hold on to it, and I'm going to travel across my work here. So I'm going to start in, and I'm just letting it knot a little bit, and then I'm moving my material and kind of following the suggestions of my blue line here. At you, it's time to slow down. right, you can see I went off the blue line a little bit in a couple places, but that's okay. That washes away. You won't see it, and all we'll be left with is our quilting design. So we're just going to repeat this on the last 3 sides. Once again, bringing up my thread. There we go. And now if you don't like following the lines going forward, we could do it sideways. We could do it from top to bottom this way if that was something that made you feel more comfortable, but I kind of just do it this way. Don't forget, with the stitch regulator, the machine keeps the stitches nice and even. All right, 2 more sides. Well, here's our piece. I think it's absolutely adorable. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna trim it. So that's another case where you might want to go to your square so that we can square this up. And I always like to start in the corner like this. And good job, Gayle. It's relatively square, so I'm just going to use my rotary cutter to cut this. So there's our front, and there's our back. And the little border piece on there, I just think adds a super cute touch. So now I want to do a binding, and we're going to use our final piece here to do our binding. And like I said, this fat quarter, it will be just fine. And what I want to do is, instead of binding it where my grain is straight, I'm going to cut this on the bias and do a bias binding. I like to use the lines on my ruler. This has a 45-degree line, and I'm going to line that up just like this. Or I can line it up down here at the bottom, just like this, and make my cut. Now, all I need to do is make 1 bias cut with this, and then I can fold it and cut like I normally would. So I'm just going to take off this end like this. And now I'm going to fold this up, turn it over, and we're going to cut several 2.5-inch strips. That's 1. 2. 3. 4. And just 1 more for good measure. Now, we need enough of this to go around the perimeter of our block. And we also need to join these in a special way. So, typically, you can line things up like this with that little miter line, and that's good because I can just sew this together and open it up, and then by having this diagonal line like that, it creates less bulk. If our thing ends funny like this, you can just kind of line it up like this, draw a diagonal line from corner to corner, sew, and snip your seam allowances. So these just happen to be quite lovely together here. So I can line this up and stitch it from like corner to corner. From corner to corner here. And I'm just going to sew all 5 pieces together. I'm going to show you how to make a traditional hand-stitched binding. So it's going to start by taking that bias that we just made and pressing your seams open at those little junctures and folding your piece in half. And so this is kind of makes it double-sided, but it also makes it easier to stitch and wrap around the edge of the quilt. So we're going to leave a tail about 6 inches or so, and we're going to start it, I'm just going to start it at the bottom of my quilt piece here, and I'm sewing it to the front of the quilt. And I'm going to start in a little bit just like this, and I'm actually going to use the side of the presser foot as my guide. And now this is going to give me about a 3/8 of an inch binding. And now as I approach the foot, I'm going to stop sewing about 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, reverse, cut, now here's something a little bit special. I'm going to take this binding piece and fold it up to make a 45-degree angle fold, and then my fabric kind of extends along a parallel line to my quilt here, just like that. Then I'm going to take this piece and move it over, flop it back down so that my miter is completely hidden there, and it is like this. See that? And now I can just continue with stitching with it up to the edge of my foot, this side of my presser foot. Okay, so once again, here we are coming upon another corner. I'm going to reverse, cut, and now I'm going to fold that up, fold that back down, and do it here. There we go. Same thing. There we go. And our final corner, we're going to fold it up and down, but we're not going to sew all the way to the end because we have that opening. And this is how we're going to line them up. Okay, I'm going to stop right there. So now that I've stopped it, I am opening up my seam here and folding this up to make a miter, just like that. And crease, 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 crease. Now I'm going to take my other piece. You may have to open the seam allowance up just a little bit. And then I'm moving that there just like so that when I open this up, and I'm giving it a little tug so it's nice and taut. And now I'm going to pinch with both hands my underneath piece here, just this bit, and my top piece. And I'm going to pin it. Then I'm going to take another pin. And flop this back down again along my crease so everyone is super happy. There we go. And now I'm going to pinch in the middle to make sure it's straight and pin. Then finally, I can open this up and make sure that this piece, which is my last piece, everything is making this nice right angle. And I'm going to pin this from underneath. And now, when I take this to my sewing machine, I want to sew from corner to corner. When you get this under here, you got to make sure you open up everything and it's nice and flat, because if you get any puckers or anything like that, it's just not going to work. There we go. Here we go. Don't forget to remove those pins before you get to them. And now we're just going to cut. Just like that. Turn it around. I would just finger press this for now as we spread that open like so. And now fold this back together. And now sew it onto our quilt. There we go. Happy, happy. And now we're going to pick this back up here. There we go. Get everything nice and tucked. Now, the finishing touch is something I'm not that excited about, but I want to show you how to do a hand-stitched binding. All right, so I pressed my piece so it was nice and flat here. I mean, I think it's looking so good. Now, I will give it a little squirt of water to get rid of the rest of my blue lines, but now I want to do some hand sewing. So I've got my trusty old thimble here for poking it through, and I'm using one of my favorite threads. This is a 100-weight silk finish thread. Now, this is red, but it's going to blend right in with this magenta and purple plaid fabric that we have. So whenever you're cutting thread, you are going to want to not cut it super long, because otherwise it gets tangled and that's no fun. But I think about maybe 18 inches or so. And so then I'm going to thread my needle, and I always just kind of fold it over the eye and put it through, but that doesn't always work. So you know what I like? I like to use a good old-fashioned needle threader. I don't know how I survived without one of these, but you're going to put your needle right in the hole there. Then you're going to take the thread that you want to thread it through and you put it in the little slot, just like this. Then, there we go. Then we press on this button and it gets it in the needle. Look at that. It's threaded. Now, I tie a knot in my thread in a very unique way. In my olden days back in Vermont, you guys will remember if you're watching, we called it snake sex, because I learned this from somebody else where they're like, two snakes meet in the woods, they get tangled up together and lay a knot. Well, that turned into snake sex. So, two snakes meet in the woods. Hello, snake. Hello. They get all in love with each other. They get married, you know, have a church ceremony, the whole bit. Then they lay an egg. It's there. It's a very tiny snake egg, but that is how we tie a knot. You can also see here that I've used these clips to kind of hold my binding into place. You can use pins, that's fine, but I think the clips work pretty well too. So I'm going to just bury my little knot in here in my binding. And come up through here, poke my little thread. Actually, I think I'm going to change my thimble to over here. That might make more sense for my particular hand. And then I'm going to go across the street, take up a little bit of the quilt and then a little pinch of the binding and come back up again. I'm not going all the way through the quilt, just through the backing. So I go down in there, pick up a little bit, it's probably just under 1/4 inch. Under here, there we go. Okay, see how that's looking? And it looks very nice on the other side. So we're just going to go all the way around. I got to a corner and I wanted to show you what to do with that. So I'm pinching it and pulling it down so that it will make a perfect little miter, just like that. And I'm going to use one of my clips to hold it in place. Then I'm going to take my needle. I'm going to use it to kind of get everything in the way that I want it. Take a little bite out of that corner. Make a little stitch. There we go. Go up through here. Sew my miter down just a little bit. Back. There we go. And now we go about our way. And then we're going to do it like that at each corner. I'm coming up on the home stretch here, and I wanted to show you how to knot. So I just have a few more stitches. Okay, I'm going to slip it under here. Just grabbing a little bit of this. Okay, now I'm going to come back down down. Okay, so now I'm going to take a few tiny little stitches, just like that. 1, 2, and then I'm going to make a loop and then pull that other thread up to make a loop, make a little knot, and bury my thread under here. There we go, and cut. All right, congratulations. We have a finished product with a super cute binding. See those little hand stitches? You can't even see them. I also like our little mitered binding. All right, folks, did you like that? Do you want to do a new project next month? Well, you can. Don't forget to sign up for the BERNINA of Naperville Fat Quarter Club, where you will get 6 fat quarters either shipped to you or ready for pickup here at BERNINA of Naperville. You can buy these right at BERNINAofNaperville.com. It's right on our homepage. And the best part is it's like a special little treat each month. We pick it out for you. We have a new and exciting project each month. Sometimes they'll be quilted projects, sometimes they're going to be bags, and maybe, ooh, it might even be a little garment or something like that. So anyway, don't forget to check out our YouTube channel for more videos like this one. It's easy. It's youtube.com/BERNINA of Naperville. And there you can like, comment, subscribe, share it out to your friends, and of course, sew something awesome. So we'll see you next time.